Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you today, and given the nature of this tag and given the nature of this week, it's obviously not a tag that I can do on Tag Tuesday. So instead, I'm doing it on a Monday, and it is the presidential book tag. Starting with question number 1, George Washington. What was the first book that you remember reading all by yourself with no help from anybody? And the reason I stress that is because a lot of you I envy, because you were readers from the get-go. You were readers from your earliest childhood, even before that, where you would ask, as young parents, one particular young parent mentioned to me the other day that children ask for their favorite books to be read over and over again so that the books can be theirs. They ask for those books to be read over and over again so they know them word by word, because they want entry into those books, and they don't have it yet. They don't have the ability to read yet. A lot of you are like that, so I want to stress the first book that you remember reading without anybody's help. For me, I am not like that, and the first book that I remember reading on my own was probably Homer's Iliad. I know, it's very depressing, but I want to hear your stories mainly. Then question number 2, John Adams. What's a book that comes to mind that's short but disproportionately powerful? So ideally, we'd be looking for something less than 100 pages here, that has stuck with you, that moves you, that challenges you, or delights you. And I want to pick, there are many things that I could pick here from the classical canon and also in the modern world, but the one that I want to pick is The Uncommon Reader by Alan Bennett. It's a novella. It's a slim novella. It is utterly enchanting. Just utterly enchanting. I know his fans would say that everything he wrote was utterly enchanting. I find a lot of it to be very self-consciously twee in ways that bug me. But how are we doing for light here? No way to fix it. All right, well, it doesn't matter. But The Uncommon Reader is about reading. It's about Queen Elizabeth II, but it's also about reading, and it is, oh my, it is delightful. And it's so short. And I don't think there's a word out of place. I think that if it were any longer, it would collapse under its own weight. So I'm very happy with it, the size that it is. Question number 3, Thomas Jefferson. Tell us about a book that you like that was written by a very bad person. And the very bad person in question here is, in fact, Thomas Jefferson, who has laudatory and praising biographies by many professional biographers, and always has, but who was not only a slave owner, but a slave raper. So he went one worse than his fellow slave owners. So yeah, he counts as a very bad person. And the first thing that comes to mind here for me is not so much a particular book as it is an author I've mentioned on this channel a few times before, David Irving, the British World War II historian David Irving, whose career started out with a book on the firebombing of Dresden that sold like griddle cakes, but also got lots of other historians up in arms immediately saying, this seems wrong, the numbers here seem wrong. A lot of the interpretation of original sources seems wrong, and you could tell in some of those original fine print way in the back of the book reviews of that book that there was something else that was bothering those historians, and they couldn't quite put their finger on it. It wasn't just that there seemed to be misreadings of original sources. It seemed something else. They couldn't quite name it. And of course, the name for that something else is a systematic misuse of original sources for an aim, for a political aim. No one knew that at the time. And Irving kept writing books, and eventually he got around to writing World War II histories, full spread World War II histories, and also Hitler biographies. And it became increasingly obvious what that political agenda was, and it was to recast Hitler and Nazism as a largely misunderstood European political movement, as opposed to pure distilled evil as any political endeavor has ever been. And Hitler the same way. And eventually reaching the point where Irving, who I believe was lost, I believe he fell under the spell of Nazism, and specifically the spell of Adolf Hitler, and that shows you that those spells don't go away when their original casters die. The spells stay. and they retain a frightful power. I think he fell under that sway. Because his later books, he started to say, famously said, that he would pay a huge amount of money to any historian who could show him even one original document that was conclusive proof that Adolf Hitler even knew what was happening in the Holocaust. Irving developed a weird alternate history version of the Holocaust in which whatever happened, he always used to stress, whenever the word would come up, he would always append it with whatever that was. The weird alternate history version that he came up with was one in which maybe Hitler's zealous or overzealous lieutenants, his Stephen Millers, might have conducted some sort of ethnic cleansing, but that he knew nothing about it and would have stopped it if he had known. And famously, this led the American historian Deborah Lipstadt to refer to him as a Holocaust denier, and Irving took her to court and lost, and was branded by the court not only a Holocaust denier, but also a bad historian, an untrustworthy historian, someone who intentionally warps and misuses original data. And that was sort of a death knell to his mainstream professional career. He continued to publish books, self-publish them, and self-distribute them to a small network of fans and financial supporters. That network has shrunk over time. It has never grown. I have read all of those books. I know that some of you might say that's ethically questionable to contribute money to this man, but I view him with utter fascination. He completely fascinates me. Now, I want to stress that the reason that I bought those books was because he's a heck of a writer. I know that seems like it's totally beside the point when we're talking about all these weighty matters of ethics, but nevertheless, the first time I read Hitler's War, the first really big full-dress World War II history volume that he wrote, the first edition of it, before he started tinkering around with the Holocaust mentions, the first time I read it, it blew me away. I thought it was incredibly vivid writing. But apart from that, I mean, that's the reason for him showing up in this particular prompt. But apart from that, I find him utterly fascinating, because originally, at the very beginning, some of the questions that he was asking, some of the contentions that he was making at speeches that were uncomfortably Bund-like, were entirely valid. If a historian comes along and says, well, the original estimates of how many people died at Auschwitz were astronomical. Now, if you look at the plaque at Auschwitz, you'll see that it's a fraction of what it was originally. Where did those people go? And how do you know the new number is right? When a historian comes along and says, well, this strikes me as so much piety, and what I want you to do is prove it. I want you to show me a documentary chain of evidence. And it's not good enough to say that it was such a monstrous undertaking that, of course, the Nazis destroyed the documents or didn't write them in the first place. As Irving used to say, what evil person ever conducted evil clandestinely? And his enemies jumped on that right away. But nevertheless, originally, decades and decades ago, I thought that was a valid point. And I thought a lot of the reactions to a lot of the mainstream Holocaust historians amounted to very dangerous kinds of wagon circling and pearl clutching. So the phenomenon of David Irving fascinates me. Just fascinates me. I don't know if he's still alive. He is probably not writing anymore. He was deteriorating rather rapidly just a few years ago. So if he is still alive, I don't think he always used to say to his tiny little Bund audiences, he always used to say that he had such and such a work ongoing and such a work was almost ready. I don't know that any of those will get done. He'll leave behind a massive record, a massive documentary pile of stuff. But I don't know who will do anything with that, and that fascinates me. David Irving isn't mentioned. He is persona non grata. He isn't mentioned in the bibliographies of books that sometimes tread on exactly the same ground that he once tread on. It shouldn't be possible, for instance, for you to write a book that centers in any way on, for instance, let's use one example, Hitler's personal doctor, without even mentioning David Irving. And yet plenty of people do. They don't mention him because he's persona non grata, and that shouldn't happen in historical circles, I don't think. So it fascinates me. I don't know if anyone will ever write the story of David Irving, but it would be a book that I'd want to read. Absolutely. But let's move on from unpleasant people. So prompt number 4 is Theodore Roosevelt. Name a book that has more energy than you do. And for me, there are a few that come to mind. I know that I have a lot of energy and I like to tackle books, but some authors just have a mania up their butt. And one of those authors, obviously, is Brandon Sanderson. And I am right now halfway through Rhythm of War, the 4th book in the Stormlight Archives, and it was the first book that came to mind when I made up this prompt. Because, yeah, it is it is not a simple narrative, and I don't need my narratives to be simple, but it is bewilderingly over complex. so that you reach a point, especially at the point that I'm at in the book, where a lot of the hyper complexity seems to me to be fan service, which shouldn't exist in a book that isn't fan fiction. I'm going to say Brandon Sanderson. I'm going to say the Stormlight Archives. The Stormlight Archives, I know I say this about a lot of epic fantasy series, the Stormlight Archives should be a trilogy of 600-page books. Instead of, we're on 4 1,000-page books now, and who knows how many still to come. And that shouldn't be. That is a failure of storytelling. No matter how much I might like it, I am enjoying the heck out of it. Question number 5, Franklin Roosevelt. Is there a book that fundamentally changed your conception of reading? And I want to stress here, obviously you'll be able to tell from my answer, that it can be fundamentally changed for the positive or the negative. In my case, it was a dropping of the scales from my eyes. I came to reading late, and I admit, at the beginning, I had some horrible ideas about what reading is and what it should be, what readers are and what they should be. Like anybody new to any discipline, I looked at snobbery as a way to sort of buy expertise on the cheap. And it took me a little bit to get over that and to hate snobbery with the ferocity that it deserves. And so at first, I had that kind of a thought about reading, that there's a proper way to do it, a correct way to do it, a serious way to do it, that sort of thing. And then I read a book called How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren. And it caused the scales to drop from my eyes right away. Right away. I don't think I was even finished with it the first time. I've read it many times since then. I read that book, How to Read a Book, and thought, you made up all these rules. I've been following these rules, and I've been quoting them, and I've been worshiping them. You made them all up. These aren't real. I can read any way I want, and so can anybody else. And it's all real. It's all serious. It's all legitimate. And it took How to Read a Book to really show that to me. Before How to Read a Book, I would have said, well, there's a right way to do this, and there's a wrong way to do this, and there's an order to these things and whatnot. And to a certain extent, in a very limited way, if you're looking to be, to have wide scholarly reading, then that is true. But in terms of the reading that we all do, I thought that at first, and then I read How to Read a Book, and after that, I said what I have said on this channel innumerable times, which is, your literary snobbery is not my problem. So I'm going to choose that one, and that is, I guess you could say, a negative fundamental change, but I'll happily hear positive ones. Then question number 6, John Kennedy. What's the most glamorous it book you've ever read? Now, some of you your readings blissfully might leave you out of the running for this question, but I'm talking about a book that is new and that isn't just on everybody's tongue, but is sort of the thing you have to read. So this is going to apply to a small fraction of readers, I would think, in our little corner of BookTube. It's a ruling principle in my other world, the world of professional book reviewing. It's a ruling principle, unfortunately, because it's ruinous. It gives heaps of attention to books that don't in any way deserve it. If you become an it book, then suddenly you're reviewed everywhere, even if your book is terrible. And suddenly no one can really call it terrible. And but the book that I have in mind here, the it book that I have in mind is from decades ago, and it was never called either good or terrible because it doesn't have any literary qualities to it at all. And that is the Andy Warhol Diaries. Some of you will be old enough to remember the sensation of the Andy Warhol Diaries and the feverish page turning that happened all throughout Manhattan and the greater boroughs of New York when the book was brand new, when it first came out in bookstores, for people looking to see if they were mentioned and who else was mentioned and what might have been in there. I fell on that bandwagon. I wasn't reviewing books at the time. I had to get a copy and I had to read it because I was moderately familiar with the Manhattan of the day when the book came out and wanted to know, who was in it and who's not. Ridiculous waste of time. I smile at it now, but now if I encounter an it book, a glamorous it book, it's with knives drawn, and now I am their natural enemy in the wild, because I don't jump on bandwagons anymore at all. I view them as utterly dangerous. They cause readers like normal people who aren't professional book critics, to waste time and money, to waste attention on things that don't deserve it. So I go after them now. I don't fall under the spell. Question number 7 is Gerald Ford. We're moving closer and closer to the present day. Have you ever read a placeholder book? So something that served only as a bridge from one book to another, that didn't have any real distinctive qualities of its own. Now, I'm selling Gerald Ford just a little bit short here, and sooner or later, I've been saying it for years on this channel, sooner or later, there is a 900-page biography out there, lurking, growing, gestating. It is coming sooner or later, and it might be brilliant. But right now, no. Right now, Gerald Ford is, when he took over the presidency, he was reviled in many parts of the political commentariat. Some, I would say the majority, because he pardoned Richard Nixon, who was manifestly guilty of crimes against the government, crimes against the people of the United States, and should have been put on trial for it. Ford came to the decision, helped in one way or another, we will never know. Ford came to the decision that it would be incredibly bad for the country to have Nixon go on trial. And that has become a precedent. I was utterly floored, just floored, when the decision was made, I guess, at the highest levels of the Barack Obama administration, not to prosecute anybody involved in the George W. Bush administration. Not even the aides who went public with memorandums justifying torture. Those people have positions at Harvard and Yale when they should be in a jail cell. I understand the motivation behind it, because then you can be prosecuted. You want to hold up that veneer. But that was the reason most people despised Gerald Ford. I'm acting on the assumption here that most of you weren't born when Ford was president. There was another reason why he tended to be reviled, another reason that I think was equal in importance, equal in the running, and that was that his appointment was completely non-democratic. He wasn't even remotely elected for anything connected with the job, and suddenly he was president of the United States. But anyway, the benign view of his presidency, of his little term in office, is that he was a placeholder presidency. And I want to know about a book that you've read. Now, ordinarily, given the terms of the prompt, it's probably going to be a book in a series, and certainly that is true for me. It's the Patrick O'Brian, Aubrey and Maturin series, a series of Napoleonic-era seafaring adventures of Captain Jack Aubrey and his friend, the physician and spy, Stephen Maturin. And later on in the series goes on for like 20 books, with infamously, I think book number 21 was literally pried from Patrick O'Brian's dead fingers. So there are like 30 pages of it that was published. The 30 pages were pried from the dead man's fingers. The dead man's final sputum was cleaned off it, and it was typed up and made into a book. Absolutely ghoulish. Instead of getting, somebody, Dewey Lambden or whatever, to finish it, to write it out as a novel and just have it with 2 bylines. But one way or another, the later books in that series, thin. Just a little. They become evanescently beautiful in terms of their narrative. The writing becomes just beautiful, meditative and weird, and just looping and intricate in ways that an author who had to work for a living, by the time you get to book 19 or 18 or 20 in that series, Patrick O'Brian had a devoted legion of followers, and if he wrote a new Aubrey and Maturin novel, it was going to get published with a minimal amount of editorial incursions, and with a new dust jacket, and in every bookstore, and guaranteed sales at Christmas, and all that sort of thing. And that gave him freedom to write in a different way. And I love that. I love that style in those later books, but it comes at a sacrifice of shot and incident. There are some later books where almost nothing happens in the course of the book. Some of them where there's one book later on in the series where Stephen Maturin, he's an ardent amateur naturalist, and he is examining the backcountry of whatever island the ship is moored on, and he encounters a wild goat, and it runs at him, jumps up, and knocks him down. And I remember my heart racing when I read the book, because that was the closest thing that anything comes in the book to happening. That was the most exciting thing in 220 pages. So I'm going to say the very later editions of the Aubrey and Maturin books, although that changes. With what I believe Patrick O'Brian thought was the final book in the series, that changes. Things pick up quite a bit. But you can tell that there's a lot more meditation and style going on in those later books than in the earlier books. But anyway, let's move on here to prompt number 8, Bill Clinton. A reading experience you loved despite how utterly sinful it was. And for me, I'm going to pick Matthew Redman's short gay novel, Boy Culture, that I think it was adapted into some sort of series. And I don't know what Matthew Redman currently does. If he still writes books, they are completely off my radar. And if that's true, I would feel bad about that, because that would be a shame. Boy Culture is amazing. It's about a rent boy who is daring the fates to fall in love. That's what he wants, and doesn't want. That's what he thinks is impossible and yet hopes for, is to fall in love with one of his customers. When instead, as he says, what he gets is he opens the door and there's a monster looking at him. That's how he views them. There are monsters. These horrible, needy, the 21st century term would be thirsty, half-naked, hairy, half-bald old men with crusty toenails and halitosis and all sorts of warped ideas. That's what he encounters. And he doesn't believe he's ever encountered anything else, the boy at the center of the story. And the things that Matthew Redman does with that story are amazingly good. Just amazingly good. It's a sinful book, definitely, because it walks the line between gay literature and gay pornography. And spends liberal amounts of time on both sides of that line. But I loved it. I strongly recommend it. Don't know if Boy Culture is in print, but I would strongly recommend it. Then we get to question number 9. George W. Bush. What is the most harmful book you've ever read? And I thought of a bunch. I thought of Daniel Goldhagen's book, Hitler's Willing Executioners, which is, on the surface, a study of a very governmentally circumscribed slice of German official life during World War II, but that by easy implication and by explicit invocation at the end of the book becomes an indictment of a whole people, in a way that the more I think about it and the more I experience life since 2016, the more I realize is completely unjust. And that had an enormous amount of influence. Another one I might mention is 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, which has sold 80 million copies, made him a guru figure, and has affected the lives of who knows how many young men between the ages of 18 and 25, and affected them negatively. Because the sum and essence of the 12 Rules of Life is selfishness, solipsism. It is not it might be the subtitle tells you this is an antidote to chaos. Well, it's one antidote to chaos, absolutely, but it bears a very unnerving similarities to the exact same kind of antidote to chaos that the handbook for the junior SS had. It implicitly instructs its young male readers to concentrate monomaniacally on themselves. And that is really, really bad. That is the last thing. It's a cowardly, cheap, and easy route for those young men to take. They encounter the chaos of the outside world. They encounter the chaos of adulthood. They're right on the threshold of it at that age. And they encounter those things for the first time ever. Unlike any other previous generation, they encounter those things almost universally without any fathers, even if the fathers are present. Now, I don't understand that. That's the part of it that I don't get. But these young men are thrown to the wolves. They're encountering all of that multiplicity, in fact, more of it than ever in the 21st century, without any guidance at all. And in comes Jordan Peterson saying, well, look at other people as reservoirs of things you can extract from them, concentrate on yourself, concentrate on your own room, concentrate on what you know, what you can learn, how you can advance. You. If you encounter a cat on the street, bend down and pet it. Because, that's nice, because it's a nice thing to do. Nothing about volunteering at a cat shelter, nothing like that. No, don't do that. That's for the simps out there. But there are, in other words, there are many candidates, but for me, probably the number one candidate would be The Bell Curve. A book called The Bell Curve, be before the time of a lot of you. It's sooner or later, probably sometime in the 21st century, I will reread it. I won't be pleasant at all, but I will probably do that. It had a lot of effect, and talk about harmful. Oh my, talk about harmful. The basic axes on which that book is built, the basic things that it says about race and IQ. Oh my, oh my. Yeah, so harmful. Yes, we're gonna wrap up with number 10, and number 10 is Barack Obama. What's the last great book that you read? A book that was great, warts and all. And for me, it's a book that I just read. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic, and it's not out yet. It doesn't come out for a while either, but I want to put it on your radar because a lot of you are going to love it. In fact, a lot of you are going to love it a lot more than I did. It's called Sometimes You Have to Lie. And it's a biography of Louise Fitzhugh, who wrote the Harriet the Spy, the children's book, Harriet the Spy. The book is by Leslie Brody, and it's the life of Louise Fitzhugh. And it's amazing. Just amazing. I was enraptured on every page. It's just what biography should do. It's the furthest thing in the world from sanctimonious hagiography. Instead, it's a brand new world. And I loved it that much without any emotional connection to Harriet the Spy. But that won't be true for most of you. Most of you have a very strong emotional connection to Harriet the Spy. Learning the life story of Harriet's creator. Oh my. Oh my. I don't think the book comes out until December. But I wanted to put it on your radar now because it's incredible. I don't usually say that. Usually December is a pretty weak month for books, especially truly noteworthy books. Plenty of guilty pleasures come out in December, but truly noteworthy books, not that many. And there are a couple of truly noteworthy biographies coming out in December, and this is the first of them all. So I want to bring it to your attention. And that's the last great book that I read, warts and all. It does have a couple of warts. That I'll get to when I review it, because I intend to review it by hook or by crook. And that is it. That is the presidential book tag, which I'm offering on this Monday, because I'm obviously not going to offer it tomorrow. And all that's left for me to do is tag people, and the only person I'm going to tag is Brian at Bookish. But anybody else who wants to do this, feel free, especially my poor fellow Americans. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.